The UK and our partners have called this urgent meeting of the Security Council today to discuss the attack last night on Zaporizhzhya power station, nuclear power station in Ukraine. This is the first time a state has attacked a fueled and functioning nuclear power plant, and it is clearly outlawed by international law and the Geneva Conventions. So, of course, we want to see Russian troops withdraw. We want to see experts get access to the power station. But this is going to be, I think, a critical point now for the Security Council to discuss.
Do you consider it a war crime?
We've already had discussions about war crimes, and the UK is one of 39 countries that has joined the call for the ICC prosecutor to go ahead with that. But as I say, attacks on nuclear power facilities are outlawed by the Geneva Convention and by international law.
Has anybody talked to the Russians about this, about this attack and ensuring that there are no future attacks?
I know that President Macron spoke to President Putin yesterday, and among P3 colleagues, we were in touch urgently with our Russian counterpart last night to call for an end to the attack and to ensure that the fire had been put out and the situation was safeguarded, yes.
And what did Ambassador Nevencia tell you when you reached out to him?
So he said that the fire had been put out, and as you can see, we're now moving into a Security Council discussion today. Thank you.
Did he say that Russia attacked it, or is he claiming the Ukrainians attacked it?
That wasn't what we just, the line that I heard from him was that the fire had been put out, and that was all that we got. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you plan to have red lines before action?
Ireland joined in the call for an urgent meeting this morning because really chilling development overnight to see military activity attack, really, firing on a nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhya. So my own minister has called this morning, Simon Coveney, for immediate cessation of any military activity in the area. Of course, we know the solution to the overall problem is that Russia halts its aggression and withdraws from all of the territory of Ukraine. Today we're really focused on making sure that safety and security standards in this nuclear power plant are respected. I want to hear from the IEA about what their assessment of the situation is. I'm worried about the personnel, the Ukrainian personnel in that power plant. We want to be sure about their safety and security. I salute them for continuing to work under such extraordinary circumstances, but we want them to be safe themselves. I'm also concerned that there will be an interruption in energy supply. The people of Ukraine are already in a dire situation from a humanitarian perspective, and we'll have time to talk about that next week. They're suffering unspeakable pressure and tragedy. An interruption in basic services, if there were an energy interruption, is just unacceptable. So we will be calling once again on Russia to halt its aggression inside.
Ambassador, do you plan to have red lines before action of the Security Council?
Do I plan to have, I'm afraid I didn't hear the full question.
Red line before action.
You know, red lines really are not what concern us. What we want to see is an end to this aggression. We believe this is illegal, it's a contravention of the Charter, and above all, it's an impunity and an attack on territorial sovereignty and integrity for Ukraine. Our red line is any invasion of any independent democratic country, as we have in Ukraine. My red lines are when I look at women and children leaving their homes with small babies being born en route, women as always the most vulnerable. We've seen some reports, allegations overnight about abuse of women. You know, the innocent are always the ones who bear the burden in this situation. We want to see an end to this aggression. As you would say, Philippe, point à la ligne.
Good morning. Well, today, the aggression by Russia against Ukraine implied an attack on the Zaporizhzhya nuclear plant. Of course, we strongly condemn this new attack on the integrity of a nuclear facility. The safety of all nuclear structures must be guaranteed. In this context, France strongly supports the initiatives of the Director General of the IAEA. Is in charge of that, and he will monitor, the agency will monitor the situation. We are also extremely worried by the humanitarian impact of the Russian military operations in Ukraine. This underlines once again the urgent need for an immediate cessation of hostilities, respect of international humanitarian law, protection of civilians, and humanitarian access. This is why France and Mexico have initiated discussions in the Security Council on a draft resolution on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur, Boris Johnson a dit que toute l'Europe était en danger après les événements de cette nuit à la centrale. Est-ce que vous êtes Boris Johnson a dit que toute l'Europe était en danger après les événements de cette nuit à...
We'll see. We'll have a briefing by the IAEA right now, so I don't want to make comments on the technical aspects. I think the IAEA will brief the Council right now. I think it's public, so I think you will have the briefing of the IAEA.
Est-ce que vous prévoyez d'établir des lignes rouges avant une action du Conseil de sécurité?
Ambassador, are we in a new phase of the war now with this nuclear attack?
Actually,
Good morning. The 8,986th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is letter dated 28 February 2014 from the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, addressed to the President of the Security Council, S/2014/136. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting: Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, and Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, who is participating, as you will see from the screen, on an aeroplane, and we hope the connection will hold. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Madam President, the Secretary General is gravely concerned by the escalating fighting throughout Ukraine. Ukrainian cities are today under siege and facing repeated attacks. Over 1 million Ukrainians have already crossed Ukraine's borders and have been welcomed by their European neighbors. We applaud such solidarity and support. Everyone seeking refuge should be afforded protection without any form of discrimination. Millions of Ukrainians who remain in the country are being subjected to heavy, often indiscriminate bombardment and shelling. There are thousands of casualties, and their number is growing. The UN is significantly increasing its humanitarian assistance in Ukraine to respond to the escalating crisis. Madam President, the Secretary General has followed with great alarm reports of heavy fighting around the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant in Ukraine. We understand that the fire affected a training facility and not the cooling system or power center. Military operations around nuclear sites and other critical civilian infrastructure are not only unacceptable, but highly irresponsible. Ukraine knows only too well the devastation of a major nuclear accident. The Chernobyl disaster in 1986 stands as a lasting example of why it is vital to ensure all nuclear power plants have the highest standards of safety and security. Every effort should be taken to avoid a catastrophic nuclear incident. The persistence and bravery of the Ukrainian personnel who continue to keep power plants safely operational during this crisis are to be applauded. Madam President, attacks on nuclear power facilities are contrary to international humanitarian law. Specifically, Article 56 of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Convention states that, and I quote, "Works or installations containing dangerous forces, namely dams, dikes, and nuclear electrical generating stations, shall not be made the object of attack, even where these objects are military objectives, if such attack may cause the release of dangerous forces and consequent severe losses among the civilian population." End quote. The Secretary General welcomes the statements and actions by the International Atomic Energy Agency on this issue and is ready to assist however he can. It's vital that all parties work with the IAEA to establish an appropriate framework that will ensure the safe, secure, and reliable operation of Ukraine's nuclear power plants. Urgent and safe passage should be granted to IAEA personnel should they need to travel to Ukraine to work with regulators. Madam President, we welcome the reported agreement between the Ukrainian and Russian negotiators during their second round of talks in Belarus yesterday. We understand the discussion focused on the establishment of humanitarian corridors to allow safe passage for civilians and the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We hope that this reported agreement is implemented without delay and that a full and unconditional ceasefire is quickly agreed and enacted. We urge the sides to continue negotiations and to make urgent progress on security, humanitarian, and other issues. Madam President, as the Secretary General has emphatically stated, the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders must be respected in line with General Assembly resolutions. What we are witnessing in Ukraine today is inconsistent with the principles of the UN Charter. Only diplomacy and negotiations can achieve a truly lasting solution to the current conflict. The fighting in Ukraine must stop, and it must stop now. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi. We're hoping the connection will be working from the airplane. We cannot hear you. We've lost Mr. Grossi for the moment. We're going to start with our list of speakers and then come back to him when connection is reestablished. I'd like to therefore invite those council members who wish to make statements, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to thank Under-Secretary General DiCarlo for her briefing, and we look forward to hearing the briefing from Mr. Grossi. The United Kingdom and our partners called this urgent meeting because Russian forces last night attacked the largest nuclear power station in Europe. We're grateful to the Ukrainian firefighters and authorities who got the fire under control and are working bravely to ensure that the plant remains safe. We support the work of the IAEA in Ukraine and are relieved that so far they have reported that none of the safety systems in the plant was affected and that there was no release of radioactive material. Colleagues, this is the first time that a state has attacked a fueled and functioning nuclear power plant. International law requires special protection for nuclear facilities, and it is difficult to see how Russia's actions were compatible with its commitments under Article 56 of the Additional Protocol of the Geneva Conventions. It must not happen again. Even in the midst of an illegal invasion of Ukraine, Russia must keep fighting away from and protect the safety and security of nuclear sites. Colleagues, President Putin said yesterday that the special military operation, or as everyone else calls it, the war, was going to plan. Everyone around this table knows that is not true. President Putin misjudged the strength, resilience, and will of the Ukrainian people to his invasion. He underestimated the world's condemnation of his actions. 141 votes in the General Assembly and the unprecedented sanctions on Russia demonstrate the strength of the global response. Every day this war continues, the destruction it brings to Ukraine, the suffering it inflicts on Ukrainian and Russian people, and the risks it poses to international peace and security increase. This must stop. We call on Russia to end this violence, withdraw its troops, and enter into serious peace negotiations. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I will now try and give the floor to Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi to give his briefing to the Council.
Thank you, Madam President. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you.
Very good. So I will try to proceed with my briefing on the current situation in the Ukraine, and especially after the events last night. We have been in contact with the Nuclear Regulation Agency of the Ukraine from the very beginning of the conflict, and we have been receiving updates and information from them without interruption. In general, the situation could be described as follows. The nuclear installations and nuclear facilities in Ukraine are quite important. 4 big sites, 15 reactors and associated facilities, plus the site of Chernobyl. Regarding Chernobyl, already last week, we were informed, and it was so confirmed afterwards, that the Russian special military forces took charge of the site. At the same time, the operators of the plant, of the Chernobyl plant continued to run the day-by-day operations over there. A few days ago, we were informed again by the Russian government that military forces were moving in the area of Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant with the similar mission to take over control of this facility. We got information in the sense that their advance towards the perimeter of the nuclear power plant was met with opposition and some group of civilians obstructing the access to the plant. Finally, this happened, and last night, in the early hours of the morning, we got information that a projectile had impacted a building adjacent to the block of reactors, 6 of them. The projectile impacted this building and a fire ensued, which was after some time put out by the fire brigade at the station. We confirm through our contacts at the regulator, but also directly from the plant, we were able to confirm that no security or safety systems had been compromised. Neither the reactors themselves had been hit by this projectile. Only, as I say and repeat, this building which caught fire, and perhaps you saw some images of that in the social media. After this, the operation of and at the plant had continued. We consider from a technical point of view that operation continues normally, although, as I have stressed to the board of governors of the IAEA, there is no, of course, normalcy about this situation when there are military forces, of course, in charge of the site. In terms of the next steps, we continue our permanent contact with the Ukrainian authorities, governmental, nuclear regulatory, and also Energoatom, the company which operates these facilities, and also operators there. This is or constitutes the basis of the regular updates, more than 10 or 12 at this point, which you have been seeing on the websites of the IAEA. At the same time, today, I indicated in the morning my readiness to travel as soon as practicable to Chernobyl in order to consult, of course, with our Ukrainian counterparts, but also, if necessary and when necessary, to the forces in charge, in order to establish a stable framework so the observance of the basic principles of safety and security, starting with the physical integrity of the facilities, can be observed. Basic elements of this initiative proposal have already been shared with the Ukrainian counterparts and the Russian authorities, which are at this point evaluating that. We believe that having received a direct request for assistance, it is our duty at the IAEA to heed this call and to try to provide assistance. Needless to say, in particular, Madam President, to your body and the distinguished representatives over there that this mission of the IAEA, if and when it takes place, would not, of course, have anything to do with the political and diplomatic aspects that are in the purview of the Security Council. This mission would be strictly restricted and circumscribed to the safety and security of the nuclear installations in Ukraine, which are evidently, and as facts have shown, under constant danger of damage and accidents. So, Madam President, I hope these basic elements will help you in the evaluation of the situation. We request members of the Council, as I have done in Vienna at my Board of Governors, to support my efforts as Director General and those of the IAEA in order to ensure a basic element in this very difficult situation, which is the safety and the security of this important infrastructure of the country. I thank you very much, Madam President, and I will be ready in case there are questions or particular points that might not be clear to clarify them. I thank you very much, and I excuse myself for the pure quality of my connection. As you know, I'm airborne now. I'm on my way to Tehran to deal with another issue which is of direct interest of the Council, which is the hopefully solution of the outstanding aspects of the nuclear power program in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Grossi for his briefing, and we'll now continue with the list of speakers and then come back for any questions to the briefers. I now give the floor to the representative of Albania. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to thank USG Di Carlo, and we're happy that we could listen to DG Grossi, and I'd like to reassure him of our full support in his efforts on the issue on the issue that we're discussing today. Dear colleagues, 10 days into the so-called special operation, which in reality is the operation How to Invade Your Neighbor, and we are in the midst of a large-scale human tragedy running towards an overall catastrophe for Ukraine first, but for Russia as well, and as we see every day, with serious implications for the wider Europe. Thousands have been killed, with at least 2,000 civilians. According to UN reports, some 12 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. 1 million have already fled the country, the fastest and largest mass exodus of people in conflict situations in decades. All developments of this major geopolitical crisis, artificially created by Russia's unprovoked and unjustified aggression against Ukraine, indicate unmistakably that it is headed towards further escalation. An overwhelming vote in the UNGA just 2 days ago told Russia that it could not take the world hostage. Unfortunately, this loud call by the world asking Russia to stop its aggression is not heard in Moscow, and Russia remains defiant and is stubbornly descending into abyss. Dear colleagues, the world was alarmed late last night after news of the fire at the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power station caused by Russian shelling. A huge blaze at the site of Europe's biggest nuclear power station was, thankfully, quickly extinguished. Yet we remain gravely concerned, and it is alarming that Russian forces have captured the nuclear power plant. Russia's grip on a plant that provides more than 1/5 of Ukraine's electricity is a serious cause of concern and could have huge repercussions on civilians and Ukraine's economy. Fighting at the plant or any other disturbance could cause a potential nuclear disaster, radioactive damage, and have irreparable consequences for Europe's environment. It is difficult not to have in mind the dreadful images of Chernobyl. We welcome the quick reactions from IAEA and the reassurance that we heard from DG Grossi, putting its Incident and Emergency Center in full response due to the gravity of the situation. They should be given urgent and hindered access to verify and monitor the conditions and ensure safeguards are all in place as the situation remains very challenging. Russian occupiers must immediately allow unfettered access for emergency service to the plant and whatever else is needed. We urge the IAEA to continue working closely with Ukraine with a view to providing maximum possible assistance to the country as it seeks to maintain nuclear safety and security in the current difficult circumstances. It is important for the nuclear power plant to continue to be operated by its regular staff. We are very concerned about the reports from the operator that the situation remains difficult. We call on Russia to end its aggression, withdraw its troops out of Ukraine, to hold use of force near any nuclear power plant and any civilian infrastructure in general, and respect Article 56 of the Additional Protocol of the Geneva Convention. Attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure constitutes a crime, and perpetrators must and will be held accountable. We welcome the establishment by the UN Human Rights Council of an international commission of inquiry to investigate war crimes committed in the aggression against Ukraine. Evidence must be gathered, documented, and presented to the courts. We support the ICC prosecutor to investigate and document crimes committed for the purpose of accountability. Dear colleagues, the UN was not created to take humankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell, as Dag Hammarskjöld famously said. It falls upon this council to do what it can and what is needed to save Ukraine, its people, and entire Europe from the hell where Russia is heading to with its relentless aggression. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. By the grace of God, the world narrowly averted a nuclear catastrophe last night. We all waited to exhale as we watched the horrific situation unfold in real time. I applaud the ability of the Ukrainian operators to keep all 6 reactors in safe conditions while under attack and to report as they were able to their nuclear regulator. Moreover, we appreciate the State Nuclear Regulatory Inspectorate of Ukraine for its continuous updates to the IAEA and to the international community. We are gravely concerned that the Ukrainian operators are now doing their jobs under extreme duress. Russia's attack last night put Europe's largest nuclear power at grave risk. It was incredibly reckless and dangerous, and it threatened the safety of civilians across Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. As a first step, we call on Russia to withdraw its troops from the plant to permit medical treatment for injured personnel, to ensure operators have full access to the site and are able to communicate with nuclear regulators, and to allow the operators to conduct shift changes to ensure the continued safe operation of the plant. Ukrainian firefighters and nuclear engineers must have full access to the nuclear facility to assess damage, particularly to water intake piping, and mitigate a further deterioration of the situation if needed. Nuclear facilities cannot become part of this conflict. Reliable electricity is vital for the nuclear facility, as are backup diesel generators and fuel. Safe transit corridors must be maintained. Russia must halt any further use of force that might put at further risk all 15 operable reactors across Ukraine, or interfere with Ukraine's ability to maintain the safety and the security of its 37 nuclear facilities and their surrounding populations. The United States remains highly concerned that Russian military forces controlling the Chernobyl site have not permitted operators there to have a shift change since last week. This is highly irresponsible behavior and causes grave concerns for continued safe operation of both sites. And we call on all countries to support IAEA Director General Grossi in his efforts to find arrangements going forward to ensure nuclear safety and prevent a nuclear catastrophe in Ukraine. Over the past 9 days, we have witnessed the devastating impacts of President Putin's war of choice on the Ukrainian people. Yesterday, the UN reported that Russia's invasion had turned 500,000 children into refugees. Russia has killed thousands of Ukrainians and sacrificed thousands more Russian soldiers' lives in the process. Russia is destroying critical infrastructure, which is denying people drinking water to stay alive and gas to keep people from freezing to death in the middle of winter. The humanitarian impact of this destruction will be significant. 141 nations across the world have called loudly and clearly on President Putin to stop this brutal, unjustified, unprovoked attack. Not only has he not listened, we've just witnessed a dangerous new escalation that represents a dire threat to all of Europe and the world. To my Russian counterparts, this council needs answers. We need to hear you say this won't happen again, as our UK colleague just stated. We call on you to withdraw your troops and weaponry from Ukraine. We call on you to respect Ukraine's borders, its people, and the UN Charter. We call on you to respect your own troops enough not to send them into an unjust war or on a suicide mission against a nuclear power plant. We call on Russia to abide by its international law obligations. The world demands that Russia abide by international humanitarian law, which prohibits intentionally targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, and allow humanitarian agencies full and secure access to people in need of aid. The United States and our partners have called for a briefing this Monday on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. We support the urgent work by humanitarian organizations on a humanitarian pause to allow for safe passage and the delivery of humanitarian supplies. President Putin must stop this humanitarian catastrophe by ending this war and ceasing these unconscionable attacks against the people of Ukraine. Mr. Putin must stop this madness, and he must stop it now. Cooler heads must prevail. Russian forces are now 20 miles and closing from Ukraine's second largest nuclear facility. So this imminent danger continues. We narrowly avoided a disaster last night. The international community must be unanimous in demanding Russia's forces stop their dangerous assault. And as I've said before, the people of Ukraine are counting on us, and we must not let them down. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente, je remercie Monsieur Grossi et Madame Di Carlo pour leurs interventions. La France est gravement préoccupée des risques pour la sûreté, la sécurité et les garanties nucléaires qui résultent de l'invasion russe. C'est pourquoi, avec ses partenaires, elle a demandé que le Conseil de sécurité se réunissent en urgence. Le 24 février, les forces russes sont entrées dans la zone de Tchernobyl. L'équipe d'exploitation de la centrale a été retenue et réquisitionnée par les militaires russes. Le 27 février, une forte détonation a été enregistrée près d'un centre d'entreposage de déchets à Kiev. Ce matin, un incendie s'est déclaré dans la plus grande centrale nucléaire d'Europe à la suite de l'attaque russe. Comme l'a indiqué le ministre de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères, la France condamne fortement cette atteinte à l'intégrité d'une structure nucléaire dont il faut garantir la sécurité. Les conséquences d'un accident nucléaire résultant de l'agression militaire commise par la Russie contre l'Ukraine sont potentiellement dévastatrices pour la santé humaine et pour l'environnement. En 2009, la Russie a approuvé avec le reste de la conférence générale de l'AIEA la décision selon laquelle toute attaque et menace armée contre des installations nucléaires consacrées à des fins pacifiques constitue une violation des principes de la Charte des Nations Unies, du droit international et du statut de l'agence. La compétence du Conseil de sécurité dans cette circonstance est également établie par les résolutions de la conférence générale de l'AIEA. La Russie doit cesser immédiatement ses activités illégales et dangereuses afin de rétablir le contrôle des autorités ukrainiennes sur toutes les installations et matières nucléaires à l'intérieur des frontières internationalement reconnues de l'Ukraine. La Russie doit également autoriser un accès régulier et sans entrave du personnel des installations pour garantir la poursuite de leur exploitation en toute sécurité. Nous appelons au plein respect de la Convention sur la sûreté nucléaire et des autres conventions pertinentes. La France soutient les efforts du directeur général de l'AIEA pour la surveillance continue de la sûreté et de la sécurité des installations nucléaires en Ukraine, en contact étroit avec les autorités ukrainiennes. Nous demandons au directeur général de l'AIEA d'utiliser tous les instruments de l'agence pour soutenir les efforts de l'Ukraine afin d'assurer la sûreté et la sécurité de toutes les installations du pays. À cet égard, la France apporte son soutien à la proposition du directeur général de l'AIEA pour la négociation d'engagement entre les parties au conflit armé en Ukraine afin d'assurer le respect des 7 principes qu'il a établis lors du Conseil des gouverneurs du 2 mars 2022 sur les implications de la situation en Ukraine en matière de sûreté, de sécurité et de garantie nucléaire. La France réitère enfin son soutien indéfectible à l'indépendance, à la souveraineté et à l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine dans ses frontières internationalement reconnues. Depuis le 24 février, nous avons été témoins du coût humain dévastateur de l'agression russe. Une cessation immédiate des hostilités et l'application stricte du droit international humanitaire est urgente. C'est pourquoi, avec le Mexique, la France porte une résolution dans cet objectif afin de mettre un terme au drame humanitaire qui se joue sous nos yeux. Ici comme ailleurs, le Conseil de sécurité doit assumer toutes ses responsabilités. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I would like to thank Under-Secretary General De Carlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings and Director General Grossi's call for urgent action today. We're here today because of our concern about the ongoing situation at the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant. Madam President, the Russian Federation's continuing unprovoked, unjustified invasion of Ukraine is wreaking havoc and destruction on Ukraine and on its people. This aggression is inflicting enormous hardship and suffering. Ireland stands full square in unwavering solidarity with the people of Ukraine, who continue to show extraordinary courage and resilience in the face of this act of aggression. The parties to the conflict must comply with international humanitarian law. This includes the obligation not to attack civilian objects. It includes the obligation and clear prohibition against indiscriminate, and disproportionate attacks. It includes the obligation to take all feasible precautions in an attack. We demand nothing less than full respect for those obligations. The attack last night by Russian forces on the nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhya has shocked us all. It has sent a chilling signal across Europe, indeed across the globe. This further reinforces the concerns arising from the armed takeover by Russia of the nuclear facilities in the Chernobyl exclusion zone just 8 days ago. Ireland condemns the reckless firing against nuclear power plants. Armed attacks and threats against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes constitute violations of international law, including the principles of the UN Charter, Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions, and the IAEA Statute, and Director General Grossi has made that point abundantly clear. In attacking such sites, the Russian Federation risks an environmental disaster, compounding the extraordinary human tragedy we are witnessing today in Ukraine. A radioactive release from any of these sites would also have serious repercussions for human life and health, for agriculture, and for the environment in Ukraine, in the Russian Federation itself, and the wider European region. President, we call on the Russian Federation to fully respect its obligations under the UN Charter, international law, and the IAEA Statute. All international nuclear safety and security standards must be maintained. We call on the Russian Federation to allow Ukrainian personnel at the plant to do their work safely and without undue pressure. It is crucial that safety systems at the plant are not compromised. Power supplied to the plant must be maintained. This is essential not just for the 6 reactors at the site, but also for the spent fuel stored there. There should be no interruption of basic services, including energy, to the population across Ukraine. Ireland commends the bravery and the professionalism of the Ukrainian personnel at the plant and the Ukrainian nuclear regulator in seeking to ensure safety at the plant in very difficult circumstances. We are deeply concerned, however, for their safety and their well-being. At this worrying time, Ireland fully supports the work of the IAEA and its Incident and Emergency Centre in its ongoing monitoring and assistance in respect of the nuclear safety and security situation in Ukraine. We believe it will be important for the IAEA Director General to keep this Council informed regarding nuclear safety and security in Ukraine. President, cavalier, reckless behaviour with dangerous forces such as nuclear power is unacceptable. It's utterly unacceptable. The prospect of a nuclear event at Europe's largest nuclear power plant will have global impacts. We all saw what happened at Chernobyl and Fukushima. This is a spectre no one at this table should be willing to countenance. Madam President, the humanitarian implications of damage to civilian infrastructure cannot be underestimated. The electricity generated by Zaporizhzhya powers homes and hospitals, ensuring that civilians can feed and heat themselves, powering life-saving medical equipment. Let's be clear, civilian infrastructure should never be a target, and it must stop now. Mr. President, once more, Ireland urges the Russian Federation to immediately cease all hostilities, to unconditionally withdraw from the entire territory of Ukraine, and to refrain from further threats or the use of force of any kind against Ukraine or indeed any other member state. To avert nuclear disaster, Ireland today calls most urgently for an immediate cessation of military activities at Ukraine's nuclear facilities. We call for the competent Ukrainian authorities to be allowed to promptly regain full control over Zaporizhzhya and all their nuclear facilities. One more time, Madam President, we call sincerely for a return to dialogue and diplomacy in good faith. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
President, I thank Undersecretary General Di Carlo and Director General Grossi for their briefing to the Council. And I also thank IAEA for providing frequent factual updates on matters within the agency's mandate. We call this meeting with partners because, President, this is an unjust war, unjustly fought. Norway condemns the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine. And now, as reported, we see shelling and fighting in the immediate vicinity of a civilian nuclear power plant. It takes little imagination to understand the possible consequences of such action. It shows a blatant disregard for Ukrainian lives, for Russian lives, and indeed life in Europe and beyond. It is irresponsible and unacceptable. Civilians can never be a target. A nuclear power plant can never be a target. Yet, this is only the latest in a string of assaults on homes, hospitals, schools, bridges, roads, and other vital civilian infrastructure. Damage and destruction of a nuclear plant would put us all in danger. It can lead to a radioactive nightmare with the most severe long-term effects for generations. President, international humanitarian law is not optional. We call on Russia to fulfill its obligation to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. These actions also violate the obligation under IHL to maintain the physical integrity of nuclear facilities and keep them safe at all times. And we recall the decision of the IAEA General Conference from 2009 that, and I quote, "Any armed attack on the threat against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes constitutes a violation of the principles of the United Nations Charter, international law, and the statute of the agency," unquote. We commend the efforts of the State Nuclear Regulatory Inspectorate of Ukraine to keep the international community updated on the status of nuclear safety and security in their country. And our thoughts go to the staff, the men and women working at nuclear facilities in Ukraine under these dire circumstances. We laud their commitments to ensuring continuing nuclear safety and security. Their perseverance is an example to us all. President, Russia bears full responsibility for this act of aggression and all the destruction and loss of life it has and will continue to cause. We reiterate our call upon the Russian Federation to immediately withdraw its forces from Ukrainian territory and cease all threats and military actions, including in the vicinity of and directed at nuclear facilities. A ceasefire is desperately and urgently needed. Diplomacy must win. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, сегодняшнее заседание – это очередная попытка киевских властей разжечь искусственную истерию по поводу происходящего на Украине. А в этом им подпевают их западные покровители. Есть перевод? Я не слышу. Прошу прощения, госпожа председатель. Сегодняшнее заседание... Не работает динамик. My microphone doesn't work. My
Let's try another one. Can you speak? Can we try?
Госпожа председатель. Госпожа председатель. That's fine. Сегодняшнее заседание – очередная попытка киевских властей разжечь искусственную истерию по поводу происходящего на Украине. А им подпевают в этом их западные покровители. Вот и сегодня мы слышали очередную ложь о том, что российские войска атаковали Запорожскую атомную электростанцию. Это все часть беспрецедентной кампании лжи и дезинформации против России. Вы пытаетесь представить дело так, что Запорожская атомная электростанция якобы подверглась обстрелу российскими военными, и там возник пожар. Эти заявления не соответствуют действительности. Город Энергодар, Запорожская атомная электростанция и прилегающая к ней территория были взяты под контроль российскими военными еще 28 февраля. По итогам переговоров с руководством атомной электростанции была достигнута договоренность об ее приеме под российскую войсковую охрану. Цель как раз в том, чтобы не допустить использования украинскими националистическими или иными террористическими формированиями сложившейся обстановки для организации ядерной провокации, обеспечить безопасность станции, а также не допустить перебоев поставок электроэнергии населению Украины и европейским потребителям. В настоящий момент Запорожская атомная электростанция и прилегающая территория охраняются российскими военными. Для этого привлекается личный состав, имеющий соответствующий опыт, в том числе навыки эксплуатации инженерно-технических средств, которыми оборудована Запорожская атомная электростанция. Аналогичная ситуация и в зоне Чернобыльской атомной электростанции. Безопасность ее объектов обеспечивается совместно российскими вооруженными силами и украинскими операторами ядерных установок. Наши военнослужащие в работу операторов украинских станций не вмешиваются, ограничиваясь исключительно задачами их охраны. Как информировала нас Минобороны России, ночью 4 марта во время патрулирования охраняемой территории, но не на самой Запорожской атомной электростанции, а на прилегающей к ней территории, российский мобильный патруль подвергся нападению со стороны украинской диверсионной группы. Для провоцирования ответного огня по зданию из окон нескольких этажей учебно-тренировочного комплекса, расположенного за пределами Запорожской атомной электростанции, по российским военнослужащим был открыт шквальный огонь из стрелкового оружия. Ответным огнем российского патруля огневые точки украинских диверсантов в здании учебно-тренировочного комплекса были подавлены. Покидая здание, украинская диверсионная группа совершила поджог учебно-тренировочного корпуса. Еще раз подчеркну, он не находится на территории Запорожской атомной электростанции. Прибывшими к корпусу пожарными расчетами возгорание помещений было ликвидировано. В момент этой провокации никого из штатных сотрудников Запорожской атомной электростанции в учебно-тренировочном корпусе не было. В настоящее время персонал Запорожской атомной электростанции, который не был ранен, injured, как нас сегодня уверяла постоянный представитель США, продолжает работать в штатном режиме, обслуживает объекты станции и отслеживает радиационную обстановку. Радиоактивный фон в районе ЗАЭС в норме. Все объекты Запорожской атомной электростанции находятся под контролем российских военных. Их безопасность полностью обеспечена, продолжается нормальное функционирование станции в соответствии с требованиями технологического процесса. Энергоблоки Запорожской атомной электростанции не повреждены. Их состояние следующее. Первый отключен с целью ремонта, второй и третий временно отключены по решению руководства станции, четвертый работает на мощности 690 мегаватт, пятый и шестой охлаждаются. По оценкам руководства МАГАТЭ, изложенным в заявлении для прессы от 4 марта, работа атомной электростанции продолжается в нормальном режиме. Безопасности 6 энергоблоков ничего не угрожает. Системы радиационного мониторинга на станции полностью работоспособны и нет угрозы выброса радиоактивного материала. Хочу напомнить, что в 2014 году украинские националисты уже пытались дестабилизировать ситуацию на Запорожской атомной электростанции и в городе Энергодар. Западные государства тогда проигнорировали данный вопиющий случай, который потенциально мог привести к катастрофе. Мы в свое время привлекали внимание к этому серьезному инциденту. Сейчас же, когда российские военные делают все для обеспечения безопасности украинских атомных объектов, разворачивается массированная пропагандистская антироссийская кампания, базирующаяся на абсурдных утверждениях, что Россия якобы пытается создать очаг радиоактивного заражения. Призываю задуматься, какой смысл нам это делать. Никто лучше нас не владеет ситуацией и не может быть в наибольшей степени заинтересован в том, чтобы ядерная и физическая ядерная безопасность на Украине обеспечивалась надлежащим образом. Мы соседи Украины. Вместе с белорусами и украинцами мы пережили трагедию Чернобыля. Поэтому мы больше других заинтересованы в сохранении нормальной радиационной обстановки на всей территории Украины. Хотел бы вновь подчеркнуть, что опасность для гражданского населения Украины исходит не от российских войск, а от украинских националистов, удерживающих в заложниках мирное население ряда крупных городов и устраивающих диверсии и провокации, одну из которых мы с вами сейчас обсуждаем. После этого во всем пытаются обвинить Россию. Вчерашний инцидент на Запорожской атомной электростанции наглядно это иллюстрирует. А ваша реакция на этот инцидент и попытки раздуть из всего этого скандал мирового масштаба, уважаемые западные коллеги, не оставляют сомнений в том, что радикалы и экстремисты на Украине находились и находятся под вашей плотной опекой и защитой. У них от вас своего рода карт-бланш. Ради проекта Украины вы готовы забыть о будущем и благосостоянии простых украинцев, как 8 лет пытались не замечать планомерные обстрелы мирных граждан Донбасса со стороны вооруженных сил Украины. Призываем вас образумить своих подопечных. По-прежнему в худших традициях террористов из ИГИЛ и их идлибских соратников, прикрывающихся мирным населением, размещающих тяжелое вооружение и установки залпового огня в жилых кварталах. В Мариуполе националистами задержано 60 граждан, следовавших к гуманитарному коридору, и насильственно перевезены в 34-ю местную школу, которая заминирована. Теперь эти террористы используют мирных жителей как живой щит, шантажируя наступающее формирование Донецкой Народной Республики готовностью взорвать школу с заложниками. Террористы не дают желающим мирным гражданам покидать города. От подобной практики страдают не только украинцы, но и иностранные граждане. Количество иностранных граждан, которые насильственно удерживаются украинскими националистами, шокирует. В Харькове 3189 граждан Индии, до 2700 Вьетнама, 202 гражданина Китая. Суммы: 576 граждан Индии, 101 гражданин Ганы, 121 Китая. Чернигов, 9 граждан Индонезии. Вчера в Харькове националистами обстреляна группа китайских граждан при попытке самостоятельного выхода на территорию России. 2 из них получили ранения. Российские военные делают все для мирной эвакуации иностранных граждан. Так, в Белгородской области на пунктах пропуска Нехотеевка и Суджа уже с 6 утра в готовности к выезду в Харьков и Сумы для эвакуации индийских студентов и граждан других иностранных государств находится 130 автобусов. На пунктах пропуска оборудованы места для временного размещения, отдыха и горячего питания, развернуты мобильные медицинские пункты, создан запас лекарственных препаратов. Эвакуируемые в дальнейшем будут перевезены в Белгород с последующей доставкой на родину воздушным транспортом. Хочу обратить внимание на еще один вопиющий эпизод, по которому мы хотели бы услышать разъяснения от докладчиков из секретариата. В телеграм-канале так называемой территориальной обороны Краматорска опубликовано сообщение о реквизиции автомобилей представителей миссии ООН. Если о нем секретариат не в курсе, мы готовы передать соответствующие материалы. В этом сообщении сказано, я цитирую: «Извините, но цель оправдывает средства. Мы реквизировали автомобили ООН, так как они нам сейчас нужны». Конец цитаты. Как утверждают националисты, цитата, «со стороны ООН есть полное понимание. Никаких официальных заявлений либо протестов со стороны ООН не было». Конец цитаты. Нас крайне тревожит, что автомобили миссии ООН могли оказаться в руках террористов и ими использоваться в террористических целях. Если же секретариат ООН действительно в курсе этой ситуации, как утверждают националисты, то хотели бы получить разъяснение, почему об этом ООН не информировала ее стран-членов. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank USG DiCarlo and DG Grossi for their briefings. It is regrettable that the situation in Ukraine has worsened further since the Council last convened on this matter. An immediate cessation of violence and end to all hostilities are essential. We continue to carefully follow the developments regarding the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear power reactors and facilities. India attaches the highest importance to ensuring safety and security of nuclear facilities, as any accident involving the nuclear facilities may have severe consequences for public health and the environment. India accords the highest priority to the discharge by the IAEA of its safeguards and monitoring activities in accordance with its statute in an effective, non-discriminatory and efficient manner. We have also noted the latest information available with regard to the nuclear power plants and facilities in Ukraine, including today's updates provided by the DG IAEA on the current situation. Madam President, while we are discussing the nuclear dimension of an unfolding conflict, this Council must acknowledge that there is a pressing humanitarian crisis confronting us in Ukraine, where safety and security of innocent civilians, including several thousand Indian nationals, in particular students, are at stake. We therefore hope that the second round of talks between the two sides contributes to the immediate establishment of a safe humanitarian corridor. As reiterated by my Prime Minister in his conversations with global leaders, including of the Russian Federation and Ukraine, differences must be resolved through sustained dialogue and diplomacy. Commitment to the principles of the UN Charter, to international law, and respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states are key principles in this regard. I thank you.
I thank the representative of India for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico. You have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Agradecemos a la subsecretaria Di Carlo y al director general Grossi por sus presentaciones. Al igual que otras delegaciones, expreso la preocupación de mi país por el incidente relativo a la planta nuclear de Zaporizhzhya. Si bien la información que se nos presenta indica que los reactores nucleares no fueron afectados y que los niveles de radiación no han incrementado, esto no disminuye la gravedad del incidente ni las posibles consecuencias que se derivarían en caso de una afectación mayor. El disparo de proyectiles contra o en las inmediaciones de una central de energía nuclear viola el principio fundamental relativo a la integridad física de las instalaciones nucleares que deben mantenerse seguras en todo momento y ante cualquier circunstancia. En 2009, la Conferencia General del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica adoptó por unanimidad la decisión de reafirmar las resoluciones de 1985 y 1990, en las que se establece explícitamente que, y cito, cualquier ataque o amenaza contra instalaciones nucleares con fines pacíficos constituye una violación a los principios de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y al derecho internacional. Termino cita. También es necesario mencionar la preocupación que existe en relación con la planta nuclear de Chernobyl. Cualquier incidente en esas dos plantas o en cualquier otra puede tener graves repercusiones tanto en la salud como en el medio ambiente. Si a poco más de una semana del inicio del conflicto hay ya 1.2 millones de refugiados, las consecuencias humanitarias adicionales de un accidente radiológico que libere material radioactivo serían tan graves que resulte imperativo tomar todas las medidas preventivas que estén a nuestro alcance para evitarlo. Señora presidenta, no se justifican las actividades militares en estos sitios. Son instalaciones nucleares claramente identificables. Atacarlas está expresamente prohibido por el derecho internacional humanitario. La seguridad física de las instalaciones nucleares debe salvaguardarse siempre, así como los elementos que garanticen la seguridad de dichas instalaciones a los que se ha referido puntualmente el director general del OIEA. Apoyamos su iniciativa para asegurar que las partes cumplan cabalmente con sus compromisos en materia de seguridad en dichas instalaciones. El incidente de Zaporizhzhya se suma a una lista creciente de ataques directos o colaterales en contra de la infraestructura civil. El derecho internacional humanitario y las convenciones sobre seguridad física nuclear deben respetarse sin excepción. Hacemos un llamado a que las acciones militares de la Federación de Rusia en territorio ucraniano se apeguen a esos principios del derecho internacional y al principio de proporcionalidad de las acciones que afectan la infraestructura civil, en particular las instalaciones nucleares, los equipos y materiales radioactivos. México reitera su respaldo al llamado del secretario general para un cese al fuego inmediato que permita dar paso a la urgente acción humanitaria. Y ese es justamente el objetivo que perseguimos México y Francia en el proyecto de resolución que hemos sometido a la consideración de los miembros de este Consejo. Gracias, Presidenta.
I thank the representative of Mexico for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Madam President.
I wish to thank you for convening this emergency session of the Security Council at this critical moment in the situation in Ukraine, and also thank USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi for the information provided. Ghana is gravely concerned about the intensifying military escalations across several cities in Ukraine, in particular with the attack and shelling of sites close to nuclear power plants and facilities. It is a relief to learn that the situation at the Zaporizhzhya nuclear plant is currently stable and the radioactive emissions remain within accepted range. Every effort must be made to mitigate the risk of accidental emissions, which pose immeasurable risk to the lives of civilians and an already fragile environment. We urge the continued support of the IAEA to provide necessary assistance to the Ukrainian authorities to ensure the safety and security of nuclear installations and staff present on site. We cannot forget too soon the horrors of the 1986 Chernobyl accident and the consequent nuclear catastrophe, which left in its wake long-term effects of radiation exposure to many people in Ukraine and parts of Europe even to date. Ghana strongly appeals to the parties to exercise restraint and to halt the use of force in all areas of critical infrastructure, including the nuclear power plants, and to respect their international obligations to protect human lives and to prevent potential disasters. We take note of the ongoing diplomatic talks between the parties in Belarus and welcome the agreement reached to create a humanitarian corridor to allow for the evacuation of the millions of people caught up in the crossfires, as well as the considerations to provide food and medical supplies. Together with the international community, we express our strong support for the peaceful resolution of this conflict and urge further constructive engagement by the parties at all levels in the pursuit of their security interests and the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席女士。主席女士，我认真听取了迪卡洛副秘书长和国际原子能机构总干事格罗西所做的通报。中方密切关注乌克兰局势的最新发展，对有关扎波罗热核电站的报道表示关切。我们注意到，根据国际原子能机构从乌克兰核监管当局获取的信息，核电站主要设备没有发现损坏，辐射水平没有变化。我们也注意到俄方就有关问题提供的情况和所做的澄清。中方高度重视核安全和核安保问题，希望相关当事方谨慎行事，在国际原子能机构秘书处专业技术帮助下，共同确保乌克兰境内有关核设施的安全。主席女士，乌克兰危机还在复杂演变，当前最重要的还是要缓和紧张局势，避免更多平民伤亡，并加大外交努力，尽快回到政治解决的轨道上来。俄乌双方已经举行2轮直接对话谈判，并就建立人道走廊达成初步共识，中方对此表示欢迎，希望这有助于更好地保护平民，有助于包括中国公民在内的外国侨民的安全撤离。我们鼓励俄乌双方坚持政治解决的大方向，通过谈判达成照顾双方合理关切、有利于欧洲长治久安的方案。中方欢迎一切有利于推动政治解决的外交努力，已经并将继续为此发挥建设性作用。 国际社会要保持冷静和理性，本着负责任和公正客观态度，为当事方直接谈判创造良好的氛围和条件。任何行动都必须有利于推动局势降温和外交解决，而不是激化矛盾、火上浇油，导致事态进一步扩大。谢谢你，主席女士。
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would like to thank you for convening this meeting, and USG Rosemary DiCarlo and DG Rafael Grossi for their presentations. We commend and support the International Atomic Energy Agency for remaining in constant contact with authorities in Ukraine and for fully discharging technical responsibilities and functions as per the agency's statute and related instruments. We commend the agency's Director General for his offer to visit Ukraine and for his efforts to secure a commitment by all parties to ensure the safety and security of nuclear facilities in the country. Now, I am almost embarrassed to reiterate that we are facing unprecedented, dire circumstances. We are not only witnessing an appalling humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, but now are also confronted with the prospect of a nuclear incident of significant dimensions due to the situation in the nuclear facility in Zaporizhzhya. This is one more reason for the international community to strenuously call for an immediate and comprehensive cessation of all hostilities in Ukraine. We are under threat of a radioactive incident of major proportions, which could have enormous consequences, not only for Ukraine, but for all of Europe. The complete de-escalation of military actions is past due. The provisions of international humanitarian law must be respected in their entirety. The safety of millions of people is at stake, and now also subjected to a nuclear threat. In that regard, we appreciate USG DiCarlo for drawing attention of the Council to Article 56 of the first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions, according to which nuclear electrical generating stations shall not be made the object of attack, even where these objects are military objectives, if such attack may cause the release of dangerous forces and consequent severe losses among the civilian population. Allow me to add that the article also applies to, and I quote, other military objectives located at or in the vicinity of those works or installations, end quote. The IAEA General Conference has adopted a number of decisions on the protection of nuclear installations devoted to peaceful purposes against armed attacks, prohibition of attacks and threat of attack thereto. These decisions must be respected at all times. Brazil calls on all parties to refrain from any measure or action that could jeopardize the security of nuclear materials as well as the safe operation of all nuclear facilities in Ukraine, as any such incident could have severe and enduring consequences for human health and the environment. Madam President, whilst expressing grave concern on the recent developments, we cannot turn a blind eye to the role that the Council should play, but is not playing in the current situation. A number of meetings have been held in this chamber on the situation in Ukraine. It seems that no matter how many public meetings we convene, a ceasefire and the end of hostilities remain elusive. This is not a paradox, but rather a warning on the failure of the Council to act constructively in addressing the matter. Brazil urges all members here to truly and actively engage to promote dialogue and rebuild trust. The General Assembly resolution recently adopted urged Russia and Ukraine to seek a peaceful resolution of the conflict through political dialogue, negotiations, mediation, and other peaceful means. This is not the time to further escalate the rhetoric, but to engage in conversations towards peace. There is an array of instruments available to the Council and to the parties under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter. The Security Council we have, the responsibility to create an environment conducive to a ceasefire and to lasting peace. At this moment, we reiterate our appeal for a ceasefire and, most of all, for diplomacy. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings. Kenya is deeply concerned about the reports made yesterday of a fire in the close vicinity of Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant in Ukraine. It is with relief that we learned from the International Atomic Energy Agency that the reactor safety systems have not been affected and that radioactive material has not been released. There are a few dangerous installations containing dangerous forces than nuclear plants in regard to catastrophic humanitarian and environmental consequences of their destruction. On this occasion, good fortune intervened to safeguard the reactor. However, the fact that the armed conflict is still underway and features extensive ground, air, and sea military operations means that the risk still remains unacceptably high. Madam President, rarely have international conventions regulating the conduct of armed conflict been more urgent to observe. We therefore call for adherence of the protocol additional to the Geneva Conventions of August 1949 relating to the protection of victims of non-international armed conflicts, Protocol 2, particularly Part 4. Article 15 states, and I quote, "Works or installations containing dangerous forces, namely dams, dikes, and nuclear electrical generating stations, shall not be made the object of attack, even where the objects are military objectives. If such attack may cause the release of dangerous forces and consequent severe losses among the civilian population." Kenya also recalls the resolution adopted last April on protection of objects indispensable to survival of civilian population, which highlights the significant effect the destruction of essential infrastructure in many conflicts across the globe continues to have on civilians. Beyond the risk to nuclear plants, we urge due caution to be taken in any action that may destroy civilian objects that are critical to the survival of the Ukrainians. Harm to them can lead to an escalation of the armed conflict and make it all more difficult to resolve it. Madam President, Kenya calls for military leaderships of Ukraine and the Russian Federation to establish mechanisms to reduce the targeting and risk to critical infrastructure. Such a mechanism can mirror the agreement made yesterday by both sides of conflict to establish a humanitarian corridor as well as temporary local ceasefire to enable aid deliveries. We encourage the continuation of this positive dialogue and call on the Russian Federation to urgently enter negotiations to settle this conflict by peaceful means. Finally, Madam President, we take note of the resolution adopted yesterday by the IAEA Board of Governors. We thank the Director General for his regular updates and the continuing efforts to ensure safety and security in all facilities in the country. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for their statement, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United Arab Emirates. I thank Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and Director General Rafael Grossi for their briefings. My country is also following the situation at the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant with deep concern. The reports that we have received about fires affecting the plant suggest a dangerous development in the conflict. The humanitarian and environmental catastrophe resulting from a serious nuclear incident would be hard to contain, and recovery would be difficult. We remember clearly Fukushima and Chernobyl, and the human costs are indeed incalculable on both human health and the environment. We must all prevent such accidents happening again. The parties therefore must ensure the safety of the plant as well as its reactors. They must also ensure that the plant and the surrounding area are not a target and remain protected from conflict, as damage to the plant could lead to dire consequences for the entire region. And for this reason, we urge all relevant parties involved to cooperate with the IAEA to ensure and protect the safety of nuclear facilities in Ukraine and to establish a stable framework on the ground. There are clear reasons for having special protections in place under international humanitarian law for facilities such as nuclear power plants. We stress again that any direct attack on a nuclear facility has the potential to lead to catastrophic and unimaginable consequences. Nuclear safety is a critical issue for my country. Our participation on the IAEA's Board of Governors is a recognition of that concern, and we will continue to make every possible effort to promote and maintain nuclear safety and support the Director General of the IAEA's proposal for negotiations between the parties around this matter and the implementation of agreed protocols. We also welcome the second round of bilateral talks between Ukraine and Russia yesterday. The Security Council is responsible for maintaining international peace and security, and as we know, nuclear threats are among the most devastating threats to humanity. The Council must make every possible effort to avoid any kind of nuclear disaster, whether from direct attack on a nuclear facility or as an unintended consequence of conflict. Such a disaster would have grave ramifications for generations to come. With regards to the conflict today, we again reiterate our call for a cessation of hostilities, for de-escalation, and for dialogue mechanisms to be leveraged and to be supported by all of us. The risks of a failure in diplomacy are too grave to consider. Thank you. I shall now resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo to respond to any comments and questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to respond to the comment of the permanent representative of Russia, who referred to UN vehicles being requisitioned in Kramatorsk. There are, at the present, no UN staff in Kramatorsk. 13 vehicles were left there. And at 10:45 this morning, the UN Department of Safety and Security spoke with guards at the compound. They confirmed that all 13 vehicles remain there. Thank you.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for the clarification she has provided, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Madam President, Under Secretary General DiCarlo, Director General, well, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude for immediate reaction by the Under Secretary General to the lies by the Russian representative. But we are all accustomed to the lies. We have survived the night that could have stopped the history of Ukraine and Europe, said the President of Ukraine this morning. Indeed, every day provides us with newer and newer evidence that it is not only Ukraine under Russian attack, it is Europe, it is the entire world, it is humanity, and finally, it is the future of the next generations. Russia seems to be furious that its plans to quickly invade Ukraine have already failed. Russia is furious that the Ukrainian people continues to courageously fight for its freedom. Russia is furious about the worldwide solidarity with Ukraine. In retaliation, Russia has resorted to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Russia does not even try to hide them. Residential areas of Ukrainian cities and villages across the country are being ruined by Russian bombs, shells, and missiles. Peaceful civilians are being killed, critical infrastructure totally damaged. Just yesterday, Russian airstrikes killed 47 peaceful residents of the city of Chernihiv, including children. But it is not enough for Russia, or Terror Russia, as we may already call it. Because yesterday they committed an act of nuclear terrorism while shelling and seizing the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant in the town of Energodar. The lies by the permanent representative of Russia are not surprising. He may not be properly informed by his capital. And we saw it on many occasions in the Security Council. He had no idea what his capital, what the president was planning to do in the middle of one of the recent sessions. So I wouldn't really rely on his words. As a result of the shelling on the territory of the nuclear power plant, a fire broke out, killing and injuring several people. The Zaporizhzhya NPP site, as well as the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, are currently under the control of the Russian armed forces. Employees of the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant are monitoring the condition of power units and ensuring their operation in accordance with the requirements of the technical regulations for safe operation. It is alarming that several employees responsible for maintaining nuclear security at the site have reportedly been killed by Russian soldiers. There has been no rotation of personnel since yesterday morning. The building of Unit 1, main building, is damaged. The overpass of the special building is damaged. The telephone line connection is disrupted and not available at the moment. The state of the power units now is as follows. Unit 1 is in outage. Its main building is damaged. The overpass of the special building is damaged. Units 2 and 3 have been disconnected from the grid, and the cool down of the nuclear installations is being carried out. Unit 4 is in operation of 690 megawatts power. Units 5 and 6 are being cooled down. State nuclear safety inspectors of the State Inspectorate for Nuclear Regulation of Ukraine are not allowed access to the Zaporizhzhya NPP site. Changes in the radiation situation have not been registered. Data from the automated radiation monitoring system of the Zaporizhzhya NPP does not work. Cooling of the nuclear fuel within Zaporizhzhya NPP power units is maintained by dedicated systems of power units in accordance with the requirements of technical regulations for safe operation. If at any point the cooling process is disturbed, this could cause radioactive damage across large territories and have irreparable consequences for the environment of the entire continent. thousands of people, including civilians, who are currently unable to evacuate the area near the plant due to ongoing shelling and fighting would be affected. Now paralyzed of the Russian ambassador about the foreign students. An appalling example of gaslighting. Example of what he probably intended to present as almost an angelic message of peace. But let me remind him and remind all of us that Satan was also an angel that rebelled against God. So I would like to ask the permanent representative of the Russian Federation if he still is able to communicate with his capital, which is probably not the case, who knows. Please make an appeal to the armed forces to ensure a safe corridor, to allow the foreign students to leave the areas of concern. Stop spreading the lies. And you know it very well, what is going on there, if you are indeed in contact with your capital. As a result of a nuclear disaster of this scale, may exceed, if it happens, God forbid, all previous accidents at nuclear power plants, including Chernobyl and the Fukushima nuclear power plants disasters. Russia has deliberately undertaken an armed attack on a nuclear power site, an action that violated all international agreements within the IAEA, in particular the IAEA Charter, the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management, and on the safety of radioactive waste management, the Convention on Nuclear Accident Warning, and the Convention on the Protection of Nuclear Accidents, and the Convention on the Protection of Nuclear Facilities and Nuclear Material. The shelling of the Zaporizhzhya NPP is also a gross violation of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism. We are disappointed by the reaction of the IAEA, whose statement did not go as far as to include any mention of the attacking site. We demand clear and decisive action from the IAEA. The international community must respond adequately to the actions of the Russian Federation, which could lead to an unprecedented nuclear catastrophe. All Russian forces must be withdrawn from the nuclear power plant. Today I have sent a letter to the Security Council President, reminding of the Council's decisions on no-fly zone during previous conflicts, in order to prevent further civilian casualties, protect the civilian population from air attacks, including those who are humanitarian personnel, ensure access of humanitarian assistance and evacuation. In this regard, we request to consider the issue of protection of nuclear power plants and other critical infrastructure in Ukraine. Urgent discussion on establishing a ban on all flights in the airspace of Ukraine should be a top priority for the Security Council. We would also like to remind that Ukraine, on March 30th, 2015, requested the deployment of an international peacekeeping and security operation in the territory of Ukraine. The document S/2015/225, with the exact modalities to be defined in consultations with the Ukrainian side. Taking into account that Russia's armed forces could not be a part of the peacekeeping contingent, because it is exactly the occupation armed forces that should be separated to maintain a ceasefire and peace. Failure of the Security Council to act, and especially due to the position of the Russian Federation as a party to the conflict, would be a historical responsibility of the Security Council and the entire organization. Distinguished members of the Security Council, I ought to ask the Undersecretary General Di Carlo to forward our request to the Secretary General Guterres to ensure that every single body of the United Nations, every employee of the Secretariat, respects the decision of the General Assembly of March 2 and does not deviate or substitute with ambiguities or fakes like special military forces the language of the resolution that is called aggression against Ukraine. A week of full-fledged Russian invasion has already resulted in thousands killed, over 1 million refugees, ruined infrastructure. It is already the common duty of the international community to stop Russian murderers and terrorists, stop by closing the skies over Ukraine, stop by supporting Ukraine in terms of security and humanitarian assistance, stop by expelling Russians from international institutions as they do not deserve to be among civilized and responsible nations. Einstein said, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil. The Ukrainians will deal with evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." The people of Ukraine do more than they can do, including by paying the ultimate price, paying with their lives. And still, shamefully, there is a handful of those around us, or among us rather, who do nothing. Act now, or it might be too late, not only for Ukraine, but for all of you. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Good morning again. The Security Council was just briefed by Director General Grossi from the IAEA and from Under-Secretary General De Carlo from the UN about Russia's reckless attack on the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant last night, and that meeting was at the request of the UK and our partners. We had quite a wide-ranging conversation, but I would perhaps pick out 5 things. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, that Director General Grossi was able to tell us that Zaporizhzhya is safe at present. The Ukrainian authorities and their experts have some access and been able to report to the regulators. But this is clearly a very serious attack. The second thing we heard was, I think, very strong condemnation of Russia's reckless conduct and attack. This is the first time that a fueled and functioning nuclear power plant has been attacked. And in doing so, Russia has breached international law and breached the Geneva Conventions. And there was very clear concern around the Security Council about that. The third thing I think we heard was grave alarm at the implications of this attack. This was a near miss, but no one was under any illusions about the gravity of the implications. There were many citations of the risk that the Chernobyl attack had, the Chernobyl meltdown had created, and looking ahead to the generations of Ukrainians, of citizens across Europe and around the world who could suffer if a nuclear attack took place. The fourth thing we heard was clear and continued condemnation of President Putin's war of choice. There were clear calls for peace and security, for the withdrawal of Russian tanks and troops, clear calls to end the war and to find dialogue. The people of Ukraine, and indeed the people of Russia, deserve peace. And the final thing I want to say is that the UK remains absolutely determined in our support for Ukraine. Prime Minister Johnson spoke to President Zelensky this morning in the very early hours, and the Foreign Secretary is doing a series of meetings in Europe today with the G7, with NATO and with the European Foreign Affairs Council. And the UK has pledged over $200 million to humanitarian assistance and to economic support for Ukraine. Thank you.
Madam Ambassador, what do you expect next? Which steps you want to be taking on the ground to de-escalate the situation and to make sure that the attacks we saw are not going to happen again, and to guarantee the safety of these areas? Thank you.
So what we want more than anything is for Russia to stop its illegal invasion of Ukraine. And in pursuit of that, obviously, the Security Council has been meeting, and you saw the vote in the General Assembly earlier with 141 clear condemnations of Russia's aggression. In addition, the UK is supporting Ukraine by providing defensive military equipment, by providing economic and humanitarian aid, but we've also announced a package of sanctions against Russia, against Russian finances and banks, against Russian exports and against Russian ships in order to squeeze the Russian military machine.
Madam Ambassador, the Ukraine keep asking NATO and Europe for the no-fly zone. Today, NATO restated that it's not going to do it. What is exactly the UK government position on that?
Yeah, and you'll have seen the debate and the statement in NATO. The question around a no-fly zone is that it has to be guaranteed. And in order to guarantee it, NATO would have to put troops in the air, and that would or could bring them into direct conflict with Russian troops. So it would be a very high risk of escalating the conflict. And what we want to see is the de-escalation of the conflict and for Russian troops to go home and Putin to end the war. Thank you.
Ambassador, on the resolution coming up next week,